But I started drawing when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And when I was in school, in the margins of notebooks, I paid attention to what was going on, what I was being taught, but I also, during times when things became less interesting for me, I would doodle in the margins of my notebooks, and I continued that when I got home. I would do my homework, but I would also draw in the margins, and then I started copying things that I saw. When I was in the third grade, there was an informal competition on the blackboard. The teacher said, "I want you all to draw a sailboat," and I was excited about that because I already had most of my classmates. They didn't take drawing very seriously, and I took it very seriously. And I was like 9 years old, and I drew this elaborate sailboat on the blackboard. I think the teacher was becoming impatient with me, but I became obsessed with that tactile connection with life. And drawing gave me a connection I didn't feel in any other way, even as a young kid. I didn't know it at the time, but my family was fairly dysfunctional. I think most families have certain levels of dysfunction, but my family really, for various reasons, they didn't show their emotions. They didn't pay a whole lot of attention to my brother and I, my parents. They weren't able to. I didn't realize that at the time, as much as they wanted to. It wasn't that they weren't loving, but they didn't. They couldn't give as much time as they wanted. So drawing became a not an escape, but a way of connecting to the world. And I was like always excited about it. So I would just copy whatever objects, other painters, images I liked in magazines. It was like plugging in a wire to the world. So by the time I was 15, I wanted to take a drawing class at the art school that I eventually wound up going to. So on Saturday mornings, I would have I bought a portfolio. I saved some money to go to the class, and I remember walking down the street a few blocks away from the school. It was in middle of October, and the leaves were changing. It was a beautiful morning. It was cool outside. And I remembered inside of me, I said, this is what I am. This is who I am in the world. And around the same time, when I was 15 or so, I started to write. And writing felt the same exhilaration inside of me that I felt when I drew. And I didn't see much difference between making a mark with letters and turning them into pictures, writing pictures in a way, than I did drawing and painting. They seemed inseparable to me, and around the same time, I was 15 or 16 years old. I saw a book by Kenneth Patchen. I don't know if you know Kenneth Patchen, but he made these picture poems, and they were beautiful. They were just these crazy mythological figures. And he would write. He would just scrawl. The writing was just completely part of the drawing. And he was a poet, but you could tell that he saw no difference between these crazy, made-up, imaginary beasts or beings, and these little things like saying, you have to have no class to live in a world like this. And there would be maybe somebody shooting a gun or something. It was actually very appropriate to the time we live in now. And I was totally turned on by that. It made total sense to me. And it was sort of an affirmation of like how I felt inside of me as a teenager. And being a teenager, you're full of turmoil anyway. And it was the one drawing and writing and painting some were the only things that kept me from sliding off the edge of the world. They were things that made life worth living, and I still feel that way. And the first time I walked into the studio on this Saturday morning, it was a painting classes were held there, and you could smell the linseed oil and the turpentine. And I had never smelled that with such intensity. And as soon as I walked into that studio, the first day of the class, I was totally, I was high from it, not physically, but intellectually. It meant a lot to me. And so I started taking visual art extremely seriously. And I became more interested in going to the museum and looking at art. And I had been to museums, but then I started paying more attention to paintings, especially. I grew up in Baltimore, and there's a wonderful museum there, so I spent a lot of time in there. And when I go back to visit, my daughter still lives there. I go to the museum, and there's just a couple of galleries there that I go to and still pay a lot of attention to that work there. It's very inspirational for me.
And you were writing at the same time?
I was, yeah. I was looking for some poems that I wrote when I was a kid, and I know that they're around, but I have so much stuff I could not find them. So I don't know. I have to dig them up. I kept a journal and that kind of thing, but yeah, I was writing when I was a teenager. I dropped out of art school. I went to art school for only 3 semesters. I went to the Maryland Institute, and I got my BA in American Studies many years later. And then I went to graduate school in American Studies. So my BA is in American Studies. And that's a whole nother story. I thought that when I was in art school, I felt that my fellow students were ironically, very myopic about the world. And they didn't know much about history. I didn't know much about history. They didn't know much about culture outside of painting or sculpture. The conversations were limited. One of my best teachers was my English. You had to take English and writing, and she was one of my best teachers. And she kind of was saying, in order to be a painter, you have to have a very kind of generalized view you have to have a general view of the world in order to be attentive to what's in front of you and how did things get to where they are. So years later, and I started reading a lot of history. I was reading a lot of poetry. I was reading all kinds of stuff. And I realized if I go back to school, I'll be able to learn faster in a more concentrated, structured way rather than just trying to teach myself stuff. So I went back to school and I got a degree in American Studies, which is just kind of an interdisciplinary field where art, culture, literature, politics, all of that kind of is intertwined, and the readings are intertwined, and a lot of writing was required for that.
Your poems actually do reflect American aspects of life.
Somewhat, yeah. This is where, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's, in a way, the work is very critical of where we live. It's a very problematic country. It's full of contradictions. It's very beautiful on one hand, and on the other, there's total abuse of what's right underneath us, and people don't listen to each other very well.
I think that people don't even know how to listen to each other.
I think that's true. I think the less, what I've noticed in the last few years, and it's not disconnected from visual art either, the less freedom people actually have, the more people seem to want to assert their egos and their selves, and the inability to listen, I think, partly comes out of the frustration of not being as free, whatever that means to somebody, as they would like to be. And I think a lot of people feel offended. So in order to assert their humanity, if you're sitting around talking with people in a social setting, I think often you have competing monologues, and nobody hears anybody else except oneself, and one doesn't even hear oneself. And it seems like in the last, well, 5 or 6 years at least, that seems to be accelerating, and it's very disturbing. I have to be with just one person if I'm out socially for a cup of coffee or a walk or whatever, in order to have a half decent conversation. So you get a group of people together, it's difficult. It's beyond, I don't know. I think people feel emasculated, or whatever the word is, and in order to counter that, they have to, like, all they have is their mouths, and it's like there's not a lot of thought going into a lot of conversation. And that's a broad statement, I understand that, but I'm fairly observant, and it just seems, if you think back 20 or 30 years, the conversations one had, they're quite different than what's happening now. So I think what you're saying is quite true. People don't even know how to listen. They're forgetting how to listen.
I was wondering if we could go to your volume of poems, Adjusting to Light.
Chronologically, it starts in 2012. I mean, of course, I've been writing a lot longer than that, but these are just things like in the last 10 years, you know. So I can start. So Adjusting to the Light was just this combination. There's no more cod. It's out of print. I actually only have one copy left of it. And the idea was, because I always thought of writing and painting as being inseparable, I started putting this book together. I've been working on it for a long time. And I thought, in fairness to the reader, it was, and I think we discussed this, it was produced in mind with the reader being able to choose how they wanted to read or look at the book, or not. You know, they could just look at pictures and forget about the writing, which is okay. So I just selected, there were 70 prose pieces and maybe about 90 paintings. And so this is just a selection from the book. This is number 4. There are places where people live more openly wounded than others. Their hurt betrays their humanity, as if a brown, wrinkled, and cracked landscape could inhabit faces, arroyos winding through raspy voices, twisted roads through half-told stories. As if a landscape could unleash dozens of stray dogs between miners' cabins. Things change. Dogs come and go, or lie half asleep all day on splintered porches, the only witnesses to the dry wind. Blackjack, half-blind guardian of the closed real estate office. Torque, blue-eyed lover of tofu and canned beer. Goldie, early morning wanderer of rickety bridges and eroding hills. Past cottonwoods, teasing, as if the brittle leaves could produce water with the wind. Past gaunt, soft-spoken women and men ripened to perfection. Past the dogs of Madrid, ghost town, junkyard, coal-black rut meandering up to the windswept mesa, shallow graves of miners and motorcycle kings. Things change very slowly. In the shade of a pinon, a black cat stares. It's funny how sometimes a clear, cold Thursday morning can seem like a Sunday, when the streets are almost deserted and nothing is open yet, when every other business is shut down or boarded up or for sale. How you can't tell if a town is on its way up or on its way to anywhere at all. You're somewhere you've never been before, and everyone who works is about to go to work, but you're not working. You're walking around first thing in the morning looking for life. This town was not so much left behind or neglected, but that once or twice in its history it boomed. In the bursting of dreams and myths, it busted. Or it just lingers on and the people in it endure. You drop in from nowhere. The marquee of the movie house says a new film is showing, but the cinema looks as if it's been closed for years and won't open for a few more. The main street dead ends at a garage washed up against the prairie. Colder air will come in with the night. A mariachi band will play to the drunken dancers on top of the bar of the hotel saloon. You can hear it outside in the sweet air as if ghosts were having a party. Over here, how long you've lived is a mark of identity, this shared abstraction, how long you've been here. It is not enough that one thinks one owns real estate, but that one's legitimacy as a human being is rooted in how much clockwork one has eaten. Like a prisoner who has served much time possesses an aura of toughness minus the poetry. Wild starlight vibrates the darkness. What I know of any place will never be enough, but I'll still be here in the morning. The size of your car, the length of your stay, the penance you're serving, the square footage of your stucco hacienda, how much you left behind. We're all burning up, some of us slow, some fast. Life is like that. I have no reason to complain. I'll drive into town and remind myself where I came from. I used to have a little money. Now I have a little money. Wild starlight shines, bent by time, turning a million corners before it reaches the eyes. Do these people know they are part of a story that tumbles abruptly forward now? Open hearts are hard to find. I don't care how long you've been here. I'm just trying to get home. Tell me, what is paradise like? Is paradise a transient hotel whose absentee landlords have absconded with everyone's security deposits? Does the twilight traffic moving west along a street crowded with memories stop in anticipation of the Messiah? For every act of deceit, betrayal, and bullyism, is there salvation, redemption, and grace? Is paradise fragrant with the fulfillment of all fantasies? Is admission free for orphans and misfits? Do people say, I don't know about the energetics of this place, or you can never be too bitter, Or, you can't go home again. Does paradise look like Manhattan, New Orleans, New Mexico, a copper mine in Chile, a description in Dante? Can you eat there? Fly to Beirut? Is there pain in paradise? Joy? Sorrow? Do your sex organs get excited in paradise? Do supervisors get reprimanded? Does the working class get pie? Are we there yet? Tell me, in paradise, what does fruit taste like? Do ladybugs hover on the rims of graves in late March? Do lovers argue on the sidewalks of paradise? Does the sun rise or ever set? Do rivers flow clean to the sea? Is the sewage line backed up from another world? Are names lost in the wilderness of another light? Is the check in the mail? Are the cookies still in aisle number 8? Is oil in the pipeline? Are there dreams? Do people who've blown themselves up reconstitute themselves? Does anyone ask questions in paradise? Last time I saw Larry Hudson of the Lazy H Ranch, he was pulling out of my driveway in his Dodge Ram, its windows shot out by a friend of his fiancée. First time I saw Larry, he claimed his truck guided him to my house. He saw the for sale sign, asked how much. I told him. He said he would take it. He said he didn't have to see the inside of the house, but okay. We still live in our house. Larry's phone is disconnected. I don't know if he still lives in his. The high plains around Trementina's thirst for story. If one is inclined for endings at all, one might be inclined to go for the happy ones. But here, the diamond door, the silver light, the golden west, the hidden day, all the trouble in between, the getting to and the leaving behind, are what matters most east of the country seat, west of the self-sabotaging dream. We're not sure if his name was really Larry Hudson. Railroad Avenue in Las Vegas, New Mexico, has the feel of 1,000 other American streets whose pavements and architecture spell palpable loneliness. The life and commerce that occurred there have an afterglow that lingers, a homesickness with no forwarding address. In the morning, you are an idealist dreamer. By nightfall, you are an eccentric cynic prowling the neighborhood, disappointed, inside a song no one hears. Thieves in suits made off with the keys to the castle and are robbed or promised cheap drugs and a calendar full of waiting for nothing. This landscape passes through us. Railroad Avenue, bathed in morning light, is evicted from human consciousness on its path to extinction. But I drive past this spook paradise in varying states of deterioration, stunned by the beauty of the neglected, the decrepit, and the seedy. I looked and saw no murderers, robbers, thieves, gamblers, gunmen, swindlers, vagrants, or tramps. The historic preservationists will return in an hour. The Guaymas River looks for water. Black winds blowing up from Tecolote and Romeroville lean into the backs of men without bank accounts. Only fools and newcomers try to predict the weather. Hundreds of Western towns are spooked in the vast surrounding desolation. Signs for places which ceased existing decades ago litter the outskirts of Neverland with the promise of a meal that will not be eaten. In America, You travel long distances to make sure you are not dreaming. It just takes so long to leave the dream that by the time you figure you ought to be awake, another place is conjured on the horizon where everything is closed. The heartbreaking beauty framed by rusty water towers and rotting windmills has the life bled out of it. All that remains are the bones of a spirit creaking just 1 mile ahead on the right. They're like paintings to me. They're bound. That freedom in the writing, such as it is, has boundaries around it, just like a painting for me. So inside of that, I'm challenged to distill. It's like a painting that way too. I'm distilling experience. So I have to do that in a limited space and time too. I mean, you know, I don't write long pieces of fiction or even long pieces of nonfiction. I've written a couple longer pieces about the West and about the river here in Santa Fe, which that's a whole nother story. It's not really it's a very endangered river. It doesn't have water in it most of the time. Yeah. Rather than being confined by a paragraph or a short space, I feel freed up by that. I don't feel bound by that. I feel very free inside that, even inside a piece of verse, same thing in a poem. And I've learned, and my paintings are small. They're not big. They're not. It's a physical activity, but not like you're painting a 6 foot by 10 foot painting. I don't have anything that large to say, at least not now. I mean, one day I might, but I don't work in that. I haven't worked any large paintings since I was young. So it's the same thing, small.
Your poems capture different aspects of American life, of certain events, but they are kind of suggested. You don't pinpoint it. You don't, you don't vociferate. People wouldn't even know if you're angry or if you're kind of enumerating things. So it's up to us to understand what kind of realities you are referring to, and also how you feel about that.
Right. Well, I consider myself to be a bit of a mirror. It's not that I don't have deep feelings about, I mean, just the fact that I'm choosing certain subject matter, but I feel like I'm a mirror when I'm in front of somebody else. And my paintings are mirrors in a way. And they've evolved that way. They didn't start, I don't think they started out that way. I mean, it took me 20 years to even start to have confidence in what I was doing.
Some of your paintings, quite a number of them, they look like diptychs.
They look like
Diptychs, like two images.
yeah. Yes. Yeah, well, it's like looking at things from a couple, like standing in one place and looking at something in front of you and then turning around. Literally, a lot of those diptychs that I've made are literally standing in one place and then turning around and seeing what's behind me. And everything is different. The sky is different. The road looks different. The vegetation looks different. The light is different. And it's extraordinary. It's all a person has to do is just shift their point of view. And I find that fascinating to be able to do that. Right now, I'm working on a large, I think it was a work in progress. It's been working on it for a while, but it's a triptych, and so it's a freestanding thing, and it's extremely complicated because it has doors that fold, and then on the reverse side it will have doors. So there's like 6 ways of looking at the various images that are presented there, and it's kind of a, in a way, it's a culmination of what I've been doing for a long time, and it's more complicated. And yeah, I mean, there's altogether, I think there's going to be about 24 images in a freestanding triptych. It'll be 5 feet long when it's spread out, and about 2.5 feet long when it's closed. So, and it's not a religious altar piece, although it's based on what was done in the, 15th, 16th centuries in churches, but it's very secular, and it actually demonstrates in a 3-dimensional way how we can look at the same thing in many different ways. And writing is the same way. And I have my own personal feelings about things, but I think what's important is, as an artist, is to stand behind what you're making rather than in front of it. I forget about myself. I try to, when things are going right. The quotation that I have from Philip Guston that I think is really appropriate. It's a really beautiful thing. He says, studio ghosts, when you're in the studio painting, there are a lot of people in there with you. Your teachers, friends, painters from history, critics. And one by one, if you're really painting, they walk out. And if you're really painting, you walk out. And I think that's really what happens when things, ideally you come back in the studio the day after you've made a painting and you go, how did I do that? If you think the painting is worth seeing or even worth making, you go, how did that happen? And that's when things are really, it's like a baseball player playing a great game or a runner running a good marathon. By the end of it, you just go somewhere else, even though you're there at each second. When it's over with, you go, I don't know how that happened. And I find that wonderful and mysterious and crazy. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but anyway, that's I think that's when art works, is when you really you remove yourself to a certain degree, and nobody knows too much about you, even though you're very vulnerable, during the time of, I think it's important for artists to remain vulnerable in all parts of life.
You also seem to capture particular demographics, mostly blue-collar demographics.
Yeah, well, I'm from a working class family, and I've always had my father's father was a lifelong socialist, and everybody in my family worked with their hands. So there is definitely that, and also my mother was born in Warsaw, in Poland. So I'm first generation American, and I never felt quite at home. I mean, my mother and her parents and all of their friends, they always spoke Yiddish when they were together. And it was confusing for me as a kid, because when they didn't want me to understand anything, I mean, I could pick up words here and there. So I never felt quite at home there. And then that was my family. And then I'd be out with kids who did not have the same background as I had. And it was just totally confusing for me. And I just never felt quite okay, except that I knew that my grandfathers and my grandmothers and my dad, they all worked with their hands. So it was just part of life. And they had their deep feelings about politics and what it meant to work with your hands as opposed to working with your just only with intellectually or having money or not having money. And so all of that has informed the way I look at things. It's evolved over time and I have a much broader view of things. But growing up as a kid, it was like, you know, we're working class. You know, there was no, every day you were reminded of that, you know.
Your palette and also your themes reminded me of Marc Chagall. For example, Marc Chagall, it was a lot of fantasy there, but it was an escape from what was going on, right?
Yes, for sure.
But let's keep in mind that the people he represented were actually commoners, were simple people.
Absolutely. Yeah, he grew up in a small village of poor people, people that just, you know, lived day to day. Yeah, I mean, that's where he came from. Yeah, there is an element of that. I think there's something element of earthiness with that and straightforwardness too. You know, there's just this and vitality that you get from that. But I don't think much of when I'm painting. I don't. Chagall isn't even somebody I've thought of for a long time. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. You know, I mean, he's definitely somebody I always admired and respected. And I remember going to the. I was in Paris and I went to the Paris Opera, and there, you know, you look up and you look up at Chagall's on the ceiling. And I remember going to the opera and I stopped paying attention to what was going on in the stage. And I was just looking up and I was like stunned, you know, and I couldn't take my eyes off of the image. It was, you know, it was more of a thrill for me. But I don't I don't think of Chagall. Maybe I should. I mean, it's interesting that you brought him up. Yeah, and also I think you absorb and you integrate people's ideas or people's images just because it's the nature of being an artist. You start out copying things, and that stuff gets, in a way, it gets imprinted, I think, into your psyche, and you don't have to think about it. It just becomes part of your learning experience. And I think it's important when you go into the studio to unlearn that stuff, even though it's there. I think it's important to forget about it when you close the door behind you and you come inside the studio. So yeah, I mean, Chagall and a lot of artists that I don't paint anything like have been a huge part of my education, you know.
And again, about the palette, you have paintings that are quite vibrant, and you have paintings who have more earth tones.
Well, I think the world is saturated with light, and the only way you can make a correspondence to that as a painter is to have saturated color, pigment. It has nothing. It's just a distillation of what's in front of you. Things are intense, but they're not that intense that you can kind of pour the world into a small space. And I just I don't think about that either. I don't know. I mean, I know some people that cook, and you ask them how they did something, and sometimes they can't tell you. They can't say, well, I put 2 spoons of basil in here, and I cooked the eggplant for 20 minutes. I mean, sometimes people cannot tell you how they concoct things, and I'm the same way. I have no idea how things get saturated. But it's how I best express myself. And I can,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I mean, I can also, you know, sometimes I think about it and I go, well, these things are, it's too much. So I need to tone it down and mute it. And it's hard for me to do that. And I do, I work on it. So I'm conscious of it. And I don't always think it's a good thing to have this very intense, in a way, it's an intense palette. And yeah.
You have 2 degrees in American Studies. And
Well, I have 1 degree in American Studies. I never got my master's. I was in a PhD program, but oddly enough, I missed painting. I didn't have time to paint when I was in graduate school. So I left graduate school and I just continued to paint. It was, so I have 1 degree in American Studies. I have a BA.
and a lot of graduate courses.
Yeah, I decided I didn't want to teach, even though my professors encouraged me to stay. They thought I was kind of a natural teacher, and they wanted me to stay, and I did very well. I loved school; it was great, but I missed painting too much. A part of me was I was unwell. The one thing that kept me grounded in my whole life was the one thing I couldn't do when I was in graduate school, because I was there and I was very constant, you know, I was very focused on that. But I missed my work too much. So yeah.
However, during this time, you were writing.
I was.
And
I was
you have
writing a lot.
several collections, several unpublished manuscripts.
I do. I have total lack of ambition.
I was wondering if you could share with us from the other collections that you have.
Sure. This is from a collection called Fictive Kin. I finished it in 2016, and this is called Jack Kerouac at Walmart. And it's I don't know what you call it. It doesn't matter. Bob Kaufman scribbled poems on napkins at the Sunrise Carryout on Columbus Avenue in North Beach. Gregory Corso returned a pen I loaned him 2 weeks before. Jack Michelin's scarf waved behind him like a flag on a sinking ship. His street songs shattered the silence on Reagan's bus of fear. Ferlinghetti held court in the Trieste. Neely Cherkasky could not stop talking. He had the heart of a hummingbird. The soft light off the ocean always came down too early. The lovers in Dolores Park always disappeared too soon. I walked everywhere to not be in my tiny room at the Avenue Hotel. It was Luigi's for spinach and garlic, Little Joe's for ravioli, Washington Street for egg foo young, the Mission for mariachi. Long rides on the N Judah line, longer walks back across town in the fog. Dick's Cafe on Sanchez for the beer and the jukebox. 34th and Church for the abandoned, the unrequited, the missing in action. The crowds disappeared from the hate. The Golden Gate lost its seekers and stoned pilgrims. Dreams scattered at Land's End. It became too expensive to live a life of wonder in the late afternoon. No one carried a phone around or a laptop. No one had a friend on Facebook or ordered towels online from Bed Bath & Beyond. An attachment was something you had with a person or a thing, not something you saved on your hard drive. Mailboxes hadn't yet disappeared into the mesh of software files and folders. An application was for a job, Being alone was no lonely place. Coffee houses held conversation and warm company. Chips were something you ate inside of cookies. Cookies were what you had when you were high. The web was for the spider. Clouds were what you daydreamed. Remote control was what you did not remotely have. A window was something you looked in or out of, something to open for air, something for light. A net was for holding hair and catching fish. A satellite was just a satellite, no dish. A bookstore was a bed for massaging your spiritual back. Walmart now sells Jack Kerouac. Marfa. The hotel casts its blue shadow over an empty parking lot bleeding onto high desert plains of West Texas. Room 113 reeks of disinfectant. No one behind front desk. Television on. Customers in the dollar store do not want to look you or each other in the eye. The westbound train speeds through town as if it was not there. A cowboy neatly tosses a riata over the head of an escaping cow. We yearn to bathe and relax in the open hands of friendship. This is the way it used to be. Out here, a hot wind blows through the hair of travelers trying to figure out where home is. Clouds stack up behind the Davis Mountains. The grass is not greener over there. Be quiet. It's official. Perhaps a little strange. Not a good time to mention it. But how do you live in a world where whole cities are bombed at the same time you are wondering what kind of eggplants to buy? The road is opened and closed. Your body is heavy. Nothing fits. You lose your footing. There are too many places you can't go. Walking through a curtain of water. A giant from another time claws at shadows, sharp as knives. Sirens never stop. Silence is the only song worth hearing. There are too many details, but the only way to find what lives under the rubble. I am looking for my wings, misplaced in the accumulation of memories, buried in the smoldering ruins. There's an implication of the mystery in front of every, like where you live, where I live, where everybody lives. And it's just a matter of paying attention to that because this is all we have, right? So anyway, there's always something else going on and I have no idea what that could be. It's nothing scary to me or anything like that, but there's always a story involved with any object that we have in front of us. There's a history there. When you look at an old person's face, even people old, I'm not 70. I don't consider myself to be an old man. But if you look at somebody who's got a lot of creases in their face, there's a whole history there. And it makes life a little bit more interesting. When you look at a 5-year-old kid, they're just starting out in life. So their stories, they don't have so many stories. They might have some, but somebody that's 80 or 90 years old. So in visual art, it's the same thing. If you look at an old house or you look at a piece of machinery that's no longer of any use, it has like what happened there, how was it used, who built it, what did it do, who sat in it, who talked to it, whatever number of relationships we have with any objects that we carry with us. So a person's face is the same thing. It's like their experience of existence, and it's like a map, So painting for me is becoming increasingly so in the last 20 years. There's a spookiness to what happens. Life is just like that, short. Well, there's a certain ruin. I guess that's a good word. Like if you look at a person, an older person's face, there's a certain ruin in it, even if the person is full of life. Maybe especially if they're full of life. There's a rule. I don't know if it's nostalgia. It's just uh, wear and tear. Life happened to whatever, to an object, to a human, to even to the natural world. Right now, we're experiencing a lot of fires. We're having a huge fire 20 miles east of here, and I believe it's about 600 square miles have been burned in the last 2 months. And I'm familiar with the area. I used to live there, and even that life that's happening to it in a fire, that life is forever different. It's not what it was. It's not the end of it, but it's going to take a turn somewhere else after the fire's gone and new plants grow and new animals populate the forest. But it's a tragedy at the same time. So out of all that destruction, there's going to be a different kind of life. Life doesn't really stop, whether we're here or not. It goes on in another form, I think. You want to hear more?
Yes, but before
Okay.
that, I was wondering if you could tell us how much time.
Some of the writing is about something that could have happened yesterday, and some occur after decades. I could be out. Usually, I compose writing when I'm walking. I'll write in my head, and walking is good for that. Painting too, but anyway, it can take. It's hard to say. The physically writing down a poem often won't take me very long, because by the time I get to that point, I've given it so much thought, and the concept has been spinning around. So I can be making 3 or 4 poems simultaneously, and so they'll come out in all different kinds of ways. So it can take years, or it can take a few minutes. I don't know how to, everything takes a long time. But I'm constantly working, and so it's almost like being I don't know, it's like being a juggler a little bit. I mean, even as I'm talking to you now, I'm paying attention to what I'm saying and thinking about it, but at the same time, I'm also thinking about this freestanding triptych that I'm making, and I've been writing my latest manuscript. So all that stuff, everything is, I can say it takes, everything took 69 years. And next year, everything will take 70 years. I don't know seriously how to answer, but sometimes a poem will just come out and it's fine. It's good. I don't work it. And other times I'll keep working it. So it's a little bit, it's not so rough. Like the poem that I wrote 3 poems ago, the poem about Jack Kerouac at Walmart, that poem was like spontaneous, but it was written 6 or 7 years ago, but it was about something. I was just thinking about the internet, and I was thinking about when I lived in San Francisco, and that was in the mid 1970s. And it wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't anything like that. But all of a sudden, those two things, it was funny to me that the words we used were used for objects that were very analog. And then you have a word like the web. And I still think, when I think of the web, I think of spider webs. I don't think of the internet. And when somebody says to me, "Do you have a website?" I still think in the back of my head, I find it it's strange to see how time has changed so much and not at all. I mean, really, we have these new tools. So anyway, that poem happened very quickly, but it concerned, 35, 40 years of history. So I just kind of condensed it and poured it into this poem, and it happened very fast. I don't think it took me 7 or 8 minutes to write that poem, and I had not thought much about it. So sometimes things happen very fast. Same with the painting, and sometimes it's like labored over. But I don't want it to sound labored. I want it. Yeah. Again, I'm standing behind it. I don't want nobody has to know all the shop talk involved with it. I mean, I can deconstruct how it happens, but really, I don't know how important it is, how long something takes.
In your paintings, and also in your poems, two things came to me, seemed quite obvious. Two opposing worlds. One is an ephemeral world of, on the other side, you show this scenery, nature, undisturbed, that's been there for millions of years.
There's always that tension. I mean, we come into the world and we have these association with objects, and we make things, we invent things, and the things become obsolete. And we're here really as I age, I realize how, and I don't know the answer any more than anybody else does, but time, you realize how fast time goes. And while you're here, I mean, my back door looks out on the mountains. They're about 10 miles behind the city here. And I look out every day, I look at the mountain, and that, I mean, millions of years of geology. And you and I and everyone else, we're here so fast, and we have all these objects we leave. Like, I don't even know what to do with all the stuff I have, and it's just kind of funny. So there's a kind of a tension between this eternal, or seemingly eternal existence that we live inside of, and then we who are part of it, but then we disappear, whatever that means, and where did we come from, and while we're here, I'm on a computer talking to you, and the computer is sitting on a stool that I stole from art school in 1972. The computer is sitting on this object that I never stole anything, but I love this stool. I sat on it my first year of art school, and I took it with me, and I still have this thing. And it's like, what am I going to do with, who's going to know the history of this stool, how much I've sat on it, the things I've put on it, what happened. And it's, I recently, it was getting destroyed, and I recently painted it. So it's like got a fresh coat of metal paint on it. It's just, it's kind of silly stuff. We have all this stuff, I don't know. And the paintings are reflective of that. And I don't have, I have some paintings with people in them, but I'm more interested in what we make and how they fit in or don't fit into the world that we're born into. And the world is just full of stuff. And there's a lumber yard about 2 miles from here, and I go up there and I paint, and it's full of 100-year-old machinery rusting out in the sun, and just scattered over this hill that has this beautiful view of the city. but there's all this junk up there, and I find it extraordinarily beautiful. The shapes and the forms, and it's just randomly scattered over this hill, and it's like an endless source of painting, and it's crowded, and it's all this. But there, inside of it, there's this beautiful stillness and solidity and calmness, and I don't find those objects ugly or anything. It's just what we've made. And I don't even know what most of the machinery was. I have no idea, because it's all been cannibalized. People come up there and they take this and that, old engines, and I have no idea what stuff is. And it doesn't matter what it is. And then I look up and I see this beautiful sky and the mountains, and sitting at the bottom of this is all this junk. But to me, it's not junk.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned the sky, because I noticed that in many paintings, you leave up to half, first half, the upper half of the painting is dedicated to skies.
Yeah.
Or clouds, or anyway, that activity, the horizon.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, especially here in the Southwest. The sky is very dominant, and the the shadows that are made by all that light are endless. Sometimes they're more real and more solid than the objects that are casting the shadows. They're very delineated certain times a year, and I've never seen anything like it. I find it endless. It's amazing to me. Even this morning, I woke up and I was looking at the shadows of some things in my backyard, and it's full of life. You can almost feel life breathing, and it's not because of the objects. It's like the planet we live on is this, without us even, it's just this amazing life, and it's amazing that it's here. And I'm still, after all these years, I'm still kind of, I feel lucky that I'm still kind of surprised that I'm, waking up in the morning and I can see this. So yeah, the sky is like, it's got a life of its own. Every day it's different. Even if there's no clouds in the sky all summer, every day it's different, because the light's constantly, the sun is our position to the sun is constantly changing. So every day is a little bit different. And next year at this exact time, even then it will be different. Who knows? And it's great, kind of great.
You also live in a state where you have this striking color. The earth is reddish.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very red here. And it's contrasted with the blue skies, and I don't know. It's odd. There's an oddness to it. There's a lot of iron in the soil, so and the geology here is extremely complicated. So yes, this is I have a few. These are a couple pieces from manuscript called Landscape in Transit, which actually goes back to what I'm just saying. The landscape itself seems to be moving all the time because of how the light moves across it. It's as if the land is being caressed by the light, and it changes all the time. And there aren't too many cloudy days here. And when it is cloudy, it's quite interesting because you see a lot of things you normally can't see because it's too bright out. I'm going to read something called Camino Real from Landscape in Transit. I walk on old dirt, a place weighed down with ancient myths, People I'll never know. Pains I've never had walk with me through this nowhere, everywhere, this holy site made unholy by those of us who choose to call this place home. I walk hills above a town held in a mountain's hands, made nameless by so much naming, made almost human, millions of footprints stirred in with rain, snow, and wind. A long time ago, a coyote killing sheep woke us in the middle of night. There was a terrific storm afterward. Walls lit up with lightning. We tossed and turned. The ground was still damp in the morning. A car was stuck in the flooded arroyo west of the room where we slept. Eroded mesas around us spelled a heavy dose of silence we had never heard before. Men I worked with decades ago asked me to come down to this part of the world where they squatted half the year. I never did until decades later. They are long gone. I am here. The winters are warmer and drier. Old timers pride themselves on sticking it out. The town stretches further into the desert. The river is almost extinct. People don't come and visit like they used to. Old friends don't write so much like they used to. We turn inward more frequently. A past spreads wider than a future. Some of us are already caught in its hallucinogenic net. So many eyes have seen this place. Sitting alone, I feel a surge of possibility in this vast confluence with time. This morning, I saw a woman in a Mexican dress, ornate flowers on a black field, pushing a rickety stroller with two chihuahuas under a blanket. Her black hair brushed close to her skull. She talked to the dogs. She walked the narrow royal road looking straight ahead. When I looked back, she was gone. So I actually wrote a manuscript in 2018 called American Studies. And American Studies is it's fairly long. It's probably, I don't know, 300 pages or so, but it's a series of loosely interconnected paragraphs that have titles. I can read a couple pieces from that. This is called Captivity. And there's a loose theme for each paragraph, but then they start talking. The paragraphs sort of start talking to each other. I was a prisoner of what I captured in light, the bludgeon term sense of place. My paintings were recordings of my human anxieties, my desire for being connected, and my inadequacies as a participant in the normal life of a city or a town. As long as I couldn't hunt down the exact time of day the sun would be setting on such and such a hill, I would be running across a ridge as if I were being chased by a rapidly changing color, moving across the earth, overlooking the place where I lived. While someone spoke to me, I would be captive to my obsessions of making an image stand still in time, with certain songs mixing in with the pigment, as if the activity of a brush moving mud across a surface and Lou Reed's dirty boulevard were having a profound conversation with each other. I was only a distiller of spirits, of winds, eroded cliffs, Indian yellow rivers winding down to imaginary borderlands. Accordions were buried under wide sagebrush plains. Shadows crawling across the sides of whitewashed houses lived in by people who were about to die. I was only a mirror of what moved in front of me, only a trembling hand talking to landscapes, only a solitary man taking a walk in order to take a look. And in this desire to take a look, I was carried away, a hostage to my own searches for what I could not know, but could not stop looking for, a place to rest and linger without disturbance, to live among the ruined faces and histories that left a residue stronger than anything being built in front of our eyes. And we would die too. I'm realizing while I'm talking to you that you had said before we met that this was sort of a journey. And while I'm reading and talking, I'm realizing there's like this cycle of themes that run through my work. I don't normally think about it that much. And this is and you said, well, this would be like a journey. And in fact, it's given me some pause for reflection about, I can stand back and look at myself a little bit more clearly. It's interesting. This is called Martians, because everybody has, even if they're just a stonemason or a bookseller or a clerk in the store, they all have these, we all have these themes that get recycled in our existences. It doesn't matter what we do. Okay, Martians. I have not been drunk in 30 years, though I am intoxicated easily as I walk the hills and mountains under a deep blue sky where my body is at rest. I know with certainty it is not I who is moving, but as sages and madmen say, it is the mountains that move. There is no day the same wherever you are. You would think the world was too full of beauty. Maybe humans just could not withstand the sight of themselves standing on a planet that seemed too good to be true. We could not believe our luck to find ourselves in such a place. Now those who will be able to afford it are preparing their dreams for a life on Mars, where everything not learned here will be taken millions of miles away. At least there does not appear to be any other life there to destroy. Those Martians to be will be growing the same potatoes Spaniards transported to China. Globalism will blast off to be galaxyism. The emigre earthlings, too, will be buried with mirrors on the concave ceilings of their coffins. So we take our internal wings and fly inside at supersonic speed toward dystopia. I can't sit still. I can't move. I can't shake these blues. I know I'm not the only one. Don't wake up on a bed full of shattered glass. Tumbleweed. What is it about the ruined corners of things catching my attention? In faces of old people or people who have suffered beyond anyone's imagining, abandoned trailers, walls falling apart, deserted gas stations, empty factories, overgrown grass in what used to be someone's front yard, rusting cars growing out of the garden far away from Eden. Nostalgia doesn't come into play because these are not people or places I would have enjoyed myself in for very long when they were vibrant, if they were ever vibrant. I think the sense of quiet and emptiness these places afford are oases along a road, places in which a life occurred, and the ruins are lines in a map that once showed you how to enter and leave. We leave very little behind, but what we do leave is almost enough to imagine dirty children running around out front too close to the road that goes all the way up to Denver, the abusive father teaching his son how to be charming and brutal all at once, long days fixing cars that can't be fixed, a radio in the back of a shop lost among the wrenches and rags and spark plugs. Even the wind seems still here. The cottonwoods behind the whitewashed buildings about to fall over, the barbed wire fence between properties is all twisted up. The posts rotted and kept standing because they are tangled up and lifted out of the ground as if they are about to be wrestled there. Here, where red roofs and sky talk to each other in languages we can't even dream. Shadows are more real than the buildings casting them. What isn't attached to the ground has taken its life away and left dry grasses scraping their stems in the descending air. Everything else is evaporating as the voices that once spoke to each other on this flat stretch of land owned by time. I have become used to being alone and in looking for these places that are not only reminders of a past that had little romance in it, but of a sense of what the future will look like as we seem to not mind building things, using them up, and moving on to somewhere else where we will do the same thing. Seems like space is endless in the heads of people who have no sense of their own limits or that their lives will ever really end. These shattered places along roads that connect them are after images of dreams, of what people thought life could be, and when that stopped working out, it was just time to follow the rain and the sun somewhere else. Making things up as I go along. It's been said Rimbaud pulled teeth on the side, that Vallejo sold umbrellas on Thursday afternoons on the Quai de la Tournelle, and that Bob Dylan had a hideaway in a trailer in Pecos, New Mexico, so he wouldn't turn into some kind of machine. Neruda's body was disinterred to prove he hadn't been poisoned. Somewhere, Lorca's skeleton is holding bullets between its bones. Mandelstam's voice is caught in the frozen air of a barracks that has long since disintegrated. It is more and less than rumor that says Michelin pounded the sidewalks talking to himself. Miguel Hernandez coughed blood in Franco's prisons, and Victor Jara kept playing his guitar after his fingers were taken from him. Someone is always trying to keep someone else quiet, especially if that person belongs to a family of people who don't know how to keep their mouths shut. It was said that Rubin had a kind voice. He could have had his own radio show, been on the other end of a helpline, or sold grave sites to people, especially old ladies, that didn't exist. His voice was so smooth and reassuring, so attentive, that you wondered why others weren't more so, wondered why people weren't angrier than they are, wondered how it is the streets could be so quiet, as if a whole country was repeatedly stunned by an evil virus posing as a human. The kind that keeps you from speaking because your voice box is paralyzed with chronic disbelief, and the kind that gives you rapid eye movement though you appear to be wide awake. I don't tell you to be less alive, so don't tell me to be more dead. The man across from me was quoting a niece of his in a story he was telling me about her, a fiery woman whose heart would not be stilled. In this country, I am always pounding the inside of the coffin lid, but no one hears me. They just tell each other knock-knock jokes as they pass overhead, oblivious to the funny noise coming from beneath the sweet-smelling grass. This last couple of poems are from a manuscript called Later, which is a work in progress. The road ahead. I'd like to play the cello, I want to be the first human to run the marathon on Mars, the winner of the Marsathon. I'll listen to the Circle Game sung by Tom Rush over and over again in my studio on a hot Sunday afternoon in August, sawdust and smoke hovering in the still air. I want to be a boxer for the good guys, winner of the Poetry Olympics. I want to run into Chris Toll on the sensory deprivation trail. I want to feel my daughter's hand in mine again before the Twin Towers fell back to earth. I'd like to know if we will still be here tomorrow, if there will be Mars bars on Mars. A friend of mine sent me a picture of the road ahead, but the road was missing. Magic carpet. I wonder if Russian and American astronauts are at each other's throats in the International Space Station. I wonder if the International Space Station is taking pictures of smoke rising from the tiny woods far below. The Earth is a magic carpet, flying through space at terrific speed. Speed and time are catching up to each other. It is later than we thought, but maybe there's not enough time to think about it. Death is a striptease act, losing its mystery. The sense of awe experienced in the presence of a dying person becomes dispersed alongside the senselessness of murder. Death happens to others, but not to us. Numbness infects the planet, though everyone insists they still feel pretty good. Each time a frontier is crossed in hostility, we learn the geography of the world. The history of blame spreads like a wildfire in June. It pops up everywhere, but no one wants to take credit. Its stench never leaves the nostrils. We learn to live in our state of multiple dissociations. Peace train playing in the background, oxygen sucked from the air. How do the astronauts feel? I wonder if the space station can take pictures of beauty that remains, traveling like lightning bugs in fields far away from the noise of green trucks headed for the border. I wonder if the space station knows where the time goes. A blanket of desert sage covers the dreams of lovers who make metaphors in their sleep. Sleep is what comes after soldiers become fertilizer for national flowers. Beneath the magic carpet, hope flies with laughter and the sound of bouncing balls in a tennis court. Birds flit between river willows. Someone important and spun out is going to work. Two brothers play pirates with their grandfather. A house goes up on another crowded corner. Traffic subsides in the background. An elderly woman with groceries crosses a square. University friends leave a bar late at night when cats prowl the alley. The flying carpet is held up by antidotes to pain, a slow boat to China, memories before people feared each other and every end to the world. Above the carpet fly madness, threats, seduction, flim-flam artists, mid-level bureaucrats with itchy hands, billionaires with rocket ships, offshore accounts, truths with no meaning, floods, drought, famines, and plagues, strangers cross-talking, racking up points in a pointless game. There is only so much magic here.
This last poem, some people might interpret it that you seem very disillusioned with the current state of art of the world.
Yeah, well, if I were actually really disillusioned, I wouldn't have been able to write that. So I think I would probably say no. Sometimes I feel disappointed in the way the world's going, but the fact that I make things every day, I'm a creator, so I'm not. If I were disillusioned, I wouldn't I wouldn't be able to talk to you. I wouldn't be able to function in a way that I'm used to being in the world. So I think if we don't give voice to our of what we perceive going on in front of us, then we're kind of lost, I think. And it's important to be able to verbalize things that are sometimes difficult to verbalize. Otherwise, I think we fall into a state where the world we live in is, I think, because I think it's more diminished than it was 200 or 300 years ago. It's easier to treat the world with less respect because what a person is born into is diminished. And so if I sound disillusioned, I think it's just, I think I just sometimes wish things were otherwise, because I live in a world of beauty, but there's so many political, cultural, environmental realities and difficulties that all of us live with. I think it would be a disservice for me not to express my feelings about it. So I don't feel that way. I understand somebody might have that perception, but the world is finite. And that's why I say the last line of what I just wrote. There's only so much magic here. There is immense magic in the world, but it has its limits. And it's limited by the realities that, we live in a world of greed and so forth, but there's also a world of hope and, people actively trying to make the world a better place to be. And I'm on that side.
In fact, I think that this project that you're on right now, the triptych,
Yeah,
represents hope in a way.
it does. It does. And the fact that there are so many different ways of seeing things is a result of my experience of the world. I mean, I'm still trying to be more open to people and what's in front of me. And the triptych kind of represents really the last 25 years of my work as a painter. In a way, it's I feel like I'm turning a little bit of a corner by making this thing. And it incorporates what I've been doing for a couple of decades, but it's just feels a little different. But yeah, I think it embodies, there's a sense of hope in there, for sure. Always. I'm always trying to know myself better. I don't know if that's what your question means. I'm trying to know who I am in a more close way.
You're a seeker.
I am.
And I
don't
think that your identity is not as important. This is what I think. I had this impression that having an identity was not as important as looking for it.
I think that's true. I don't see any end to learning and if that includes who I am in the world, I don't see that ending until I'm not here anymore, until the moment I'm no longer exist. So I don't think that stuff ever stops. I mean, I know people who I don't think they think much about their identity. I guess I have to ask you, what do you mean by identity? Do you mean selfhood, self in the world?
Identity, I mean in the contemporary context of what's happening right now.
Yeah, yeah.
I just feel that you are addressing a fracture.
Um, yeah, I wonder quite often, how do I fit? Who am I in this world that seems increasingly less recognizable to me as a world that's safe to live in for anyone? I don't think about it just for myself. But yeah, I mean, I have lived a very chaotic existence. I used to live a very chaotic existence, but I always made a clearing in my studio or where I live for my physical existence to come home to a sanctuary, to a place that was important for me to think in. And I still have that. But it seems the chaos of the world insists on intruding itself into our lives that is extremely disruptive. So I am very wary of having my life disrupted, and and I can't help it, but I take some of that disruption and I'm putting it into my work, because at any given moment only have control over what I do in the studio. I don't really, that's all I want control over. I don't have control over other people. I don't have control over events beyond my immediate existence. I don't. So yeah, I am constantly trying to adapt myself to a world that I do not always understand, you know. So in that sense, uh, I'm trying to evolve as a human being, but personally, um, I don't always know who I am or how I fit into this world, you know.
You've done a series of readings in different places, including universities, colleges. Are you
Yeah,
still doing these readings?
I have not done any readings for a while. No, I haven't done any readings in public for a while. I exhibit less than I used to. I would be happy to give a reading somewhere, but it just hasn't, the context hasn't happened. The last couple of years have been, I've just been focused on working in the studio and writing. I haven't been out in the public. I'm just going out publicly more, but no, I haven't given any readings publicly. And I don't like, I'd want to do it in person. I think poetry readings are about being able to read and converse with the audience. And it's impossible, it's more difficult to do that in this kind of a model. It's more difficult for me. Like I don't, like if you were sitting across a table from me, my reading would have been different. I'm sitting here alone in my studio, and you're in the ether. It's a miracle. It's really cool and great, but it's not the same as being in person. I can't touch you. I can't smell you. I can't see all the subtleties of your facial expressions. There's no noise in the same room. What I'm hearing here are birds outside my window. I don't know what you hear. We're experiencing different things, but giving a reading in public has become more problematic, and that's just beginning again here. So I don't know. I gave a very short reading actually a month ago. That's not true. I gave a reading a month ago at a local theater because I had submitted a few poems, and the poet laureate of Santa Fe invited a few poets to come and read. It was through a local newspaper. So I read 3 poems, a very short reading. It was a group reading. I did do that. I kind of forgot about it. It was a strange day, but I have read recently, a month ago. But I'm used to giving like 20 or 30-minute readings, and it was very brief.
this triptych that you're doing, do you have plans on showing it in a certain place, or you're working on it and then think about where you could show the triptych?
Well, I hadn't planned on showing it, but I was asked to have a show in September. So when I have the show, I'll exhibit the triptych. Will be finished by then, and I'll exhibit it then. I'll either build a table or have a table and bring it in there, so people can walk around it. So that'll be part of a show I'm gonna have, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I want people to see it. I mean, you mentioned Chagall, and he's not really a big influence on my life or anything. And oftentimes, not only visual artists. So the only thing we didn't really cover, and it's not really that important, are other people that have informed my work. Certainly, I mean, I've looked at a lot of art. There's just so many people. I mean, even people like Gustave Courbet and Corot and incredible landscape art. Actually, Courbet, there's this landscape at the Baltimore Museum of Art. I think it's called the Grotto. I'm not sure what it's called. It's just beautiful painting, and it's rich in these, like, there must be 40 or 50 different tones of green in it. It's like sort of a forest, and it's just, and it's so passionate. And so even if I'm not interested in the style of somebody, it's the fact that somebody's put so much heart into their work. Like people like, I don't know if you know the painter Albert Pinkham Ryder. He was an American painter around the turn of the century, not 20th century, around 1900, 1910, late 1890s. He was this kind of a mystic, and he would, I love Albert Pinkham Ryder, but he would paint. He knew nothing about technique, so he would varnish a painting, and he wouldn't take the varnish off, and he would paint on top of it, and then he would varnish it, and then he would paint on top of it, and then he would varnish it, paint on top of it, and they became these crusty things, and they were all cracked. They looked like cracked earth, and sometimes he would sell a painting to somebody, and 10 years later, he would knock on somebody's door and say, "I want my painting back because I'm not finished with it. I need to work on it more." He didn't paint that many paintings, and a lot of them are very small. And I paint nothing like Ryder, but I thought his approach to painting was so serious, and so there was like a gravitas involved with it. And he was such a crank and a kook. He was kooky, and you could see all his whole heart was poured into his work. And so he was a huge inspiration for me. Somebody like him, or Philip Guston. I don't know if you know Philip Guston. He was born in Montreal, actually, but he moved to Los Angeles, and he had quite an evolution as a painter. He started out as a like social realist painter. He was political in the 1930s, and then he became part of the abstract expressionist movement in New York. And then he stopped doing that, and he lost a lot of friends, got angry with him because he started painting these other kind of paintings. And he was wonderful painter, but very passionate painter. Richard Diebenkorn, and his use of color and composition, there's a lot of people. But that quote that I read was by Philip Guston, where he says you have all these influences and you take them into the studio, and if you're lucky and you're really painting, they walk out. And if you're really painting, you walk out too. I still go back to that. And Guston is a huge influence. I saw there was a retrospective of Guston's paintings in 1980 or 81 at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington. And I went there with 3 friends. And all 4 of us were still friends. And we sometimes talk about that day we went there. And all of us were blown away by that show. It was unbelievable body of work. And so yeah, there's moments like that in your life where,
And
and none of us paint anything like him. That's not the point. Go ahead.
what about the poetry? Who or writers? Who was influential for you?
Oh, a lot of writers. There's a poet named Hayden Carruth. He's passed away now, but Hayden Carruth's poetry and the New York School of Poets, people like Ted Berrigan and Ron Paget and Anne Waldman, Alice Notley, and Black Mountain School of Poets, some of those guys, Robert Creeley and Edward Dorn. But then, also writers like Julio Cortázar from Argentina, and Cesar Vallejo, who was from Peru, kind of all over the place with that. But yeah, beat poets, Allen Ginsberg. Those, at one point, I was extremely, romanticized.
You sent me two quotes.
Two quotes. Richard Diebenkorn. His quote about certainty, yeah. Attempt what is not certain. So the mysterious. Attempt what is not certain. Certainty may or may not come later. It may then be a valuable delusion. So even if you're sure that you're on the right path, you're just deluding yourself. Because again, going back to learning and figuring out who you are and where you're going with your work, you can throw it out the window. That's my interpretation of it. But it's certainty is worth attempting, but you never get there. Why? That would be like, a nail in the coffin. So if you're constantly growing and you're alive, and even if it, like, my work is evolved very slowly. I'm a very, very late bloomer. I mean, I hope that I live to be 80 years old, and by then I'm actually have focused more on everything that I'm learning right now, and have learned, especially in the last 20 years, about my work and who I am. Again, I mean, if you're talking about identity, I'm not uncomfortable with myself. I'm uncomfortable with how uncomfortable with the world, if that makes any sense. It gives me a lot of, I feel very restless about it. I'm not sure the right word for it. There's probably many words for it. I feel, I don't know, just disturbed by the world. And I don't walk around disturbed, but when I'm talking with somebody about it and ideas are come to life through words, it's a difficult place. And I have grandkids, and I think about them and the world they're growing up in.
You also have very complex roots.
Well, yeah, most of my family was killed in the war, and my father's side too. My father was a medic in World War II, so he was in France, and he saw a lot. So I mean, it's really interesting because my grandparents experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, and then death, and all that stuff was kind of dragged in a way. I mean, they left their home and they came here. They never felt at home in the United States, even though they were grateful to be here. And at the same time, my father, who was the son of immigrants, he went over and he to Europe and was a medic, and he came back traumatized, and I didn't understand that when I was growing up. He was completely traumatized by the war. I mean, and which affected the way he was with everything he did. And so I grew up in this family of like, you know, it's like, wow. You know, my mother's family they were survivors. My father was too. So, you know, it is complicated. And not everybody who lived in my neighborhood when I grew up had that experience. You know, some did and some didn't. Even my barber, who was friends with my grandfather, he had been in concentration camps. So when he was cutting my hair, I would like stare. I didn't know. I wasn't old enough. I didn't understand. I asked, well, "What are those numbers on your arm?" You know, I didn't know. You know, the first few times I saw him, and so even that, you know, it's like 7 or 8 years old. It's like, why does, you know, Isaac have numbers on his arm? So, you know, you grow up with that. It's different. And you think about it, my family spanned all of the 20th century. My father's father lived to be 102. And they kind of, you know, we're talking about the late 19th century into the late 20th century. And then my parents lived, you know, into the my father lived into the 21st century. So you kind of have this history, which was my interest in history. Like, how did everything happen? Why are things the way they are? You know, is there a reason even for any of it? So I'm not really disillusioned. Again, it's like every time something is made, it's an affirmation. I think it's easy for people to say, oh, that person's disillusioned, or they're cynical, or they're sour on this and that. The fact that you're able to make anything is a life-affirming activity. Just as this conversation. I have written about it, I just didn't select any of those from this. It seemed like we could go on for hours talking. And so I didn't want to, that would have opened up a whole nother door, which I'm happy to open. Because you know, when my mother was dying, we spent hours recording. She just talked. And so we did a family history. I knew the history, but I wanted it recorded. So she talked a lot about this stuff. And my grandparents came to the United States in 1929. My mother came when she was a little girl. They were able to leave before. The problem was that all of my grandmother's family stayed in Poland. So she kept in touch with them, but they all died. So she had been traumatized anyway because her first husband was murdered. She'd been married for 2 weeks and he was coming home from work and he was murdered. It was an anti-Semitic thing. And it was like, she was already, you know, she was gone, you know, in many ways before she met my grandfather. So all of that's, I've written about, you know, some of it. What's interesting about being American and having that background is that what happens is the damage that was done 80 years ago cascades into everyone else in that family. So you multiply that time hundreds of thousands of people, because it's a form of displacement that happens emotionally, not just physically. And it wasn't really until I was older that I started to think about it more, you know, when I was like in my 30s and 40s, because I didn't understand my family and they didn't talk about it, like I said. So the damage cascades through decades. And I don't think people get that. And it's happening now again, you know, of course. I mean, it happened everywhere. Rwanda, now in Ukraine, and, you know, wherever it happens. It happens the same way. It's awful. You know, so, but I'm aware of it. I had a cousin, I never really wrote about him. He was a German, He was a German Catholic. But he was a communist. He belonged to the Communist Party, and he lived in Brussels. And he was a journalist. He wrote, and when the Nazis came into Brussels, he was in this building, the newspaper building, and there was a shootout. They were then there, and they wouldn't leave. And he was one of the people that survived. And the Germans weren't quite sure what to do with him because he had a brother who was an officer in the German army. He was up there in the German army. So they let him live, and they sent him to Auschwitz, and he survived the war. And the first time I went to Europe, I went to Brussels, and he wanted to take me to, he was put in a transit camp. In World War I, there were like 12 forts around Brussels. And one of these places was made into a transit camp when they were figuring out where to send everybody. There were a lot of political prisoners there. There were homosexuals. There were Jews. There was a bunch, I think some Catholic priests, whatever. And he was in that camp, and it's a museum. So he took me to see that. And when you see something like, and it was kept pretty much the way it was empty, of course, but it was, he showed me where he was and where everybody was and where the executions were. And you see that, and it's, you don't ever, that's another day in my life that, it's like a turning point. He was just matter of fact about it. He wanted me to see it. It was a real education for me. And he was quite a human being. And he had married into my family. So he was married to one of my grandmother's nieces. He was a really wonderful man. He became a painter. And he said he painted because it helped him, it made life worth bearing. And he was a pretty good painter.
So he was sent to camp because he was
he was a communist. He belonged to the Communist Party. He was a political prisoner. But he was sent to Auschwitz. He did hard labor there. He wasn't in the extermination part of the camp. And they let him live, because his brother intervened because he was an officer in the German army. He saved his life. They were on opposite ends of the political, but they were still brothers. So, and they talked to each other after the war. I don't think they were that friendly, but they had a relationship. But he stayed a communist till the day he died. So.
How about you? Because you seem to have a broader spectrum.
But my father, he didn't have really strong political views. I've always had stronger political views, but I like to keep a dialogue going with people I don't agree with. I don't have any reason to agitate somebody to try to convince them of how I think. I'm not interested in that. But I've been active off and on politically. I was a union steward. I worked in politics a little bit, but it's not a huge, right now in my life, it's not important.